everybody ought to have a second chance. Second chances matter. These folks, George, understand they have served their time. They're done with probation or parole. They're back in society. They're living in our communities. They have jobs. They're paying taxes. Why don't we possibly want them to vote?
Virginia Governor Terry McAuliffe last Sunday on ABC's This Week defending his executive order that ruled that over 200,000 ex-felons could vote in this year's upcoming elections. And a lot of Republicans take a look at that Democrat governor and they say, the timing is somewhat curious and the motive is political. But as it turns out, comprehensive criminal justice reform is full steam ahead in the United States Senate. The Sentencing Reform and Corrections Act now has bipartisan support from 37 senators. This act would reduce minimum penalties for low-level offenders and possibly reduce prison sentences for good behavior. Several organizations, such as Right on Crime, support this legislation. And for more, we are pleased to be joined by the founder and president of Americans for Tax Reform, Grover Norquist. Norquist also signed the Right on Crime Statement of Principles, and he joins us tonight from Newsmax, Washington. Grover, when I first got to Congress, and indeed on the campaign trail, the right has been known as tough on crime. So why are so many conservatives getting behind this bill?
Well, we should be tough on crime. What we're looking at with federal laws is taking some of the lessons we've learned from Texas and other states that have begun to think, how many people do we need in prison and for how long? It costs about $30,000 a year on average in the United States to keep somebody in prison for 1 year, $50,000 if you're in California. So if there's some ways of having nonviolent criminals, not necessarily in prison for 20 years, but in prison and then under strict supervision, can you have strict supervision with ankle bracelets and GPS technology where you know where somebody is all day? There's some real opportunities to let less problematic criminals out sooner than otherwise and keep people who need to stay in prison as long as they need to. I'm all in favor of executing murderers, and there's some people who should never be allowed out of prison at all. But we need to double check that we're not keeping someone in prison for a decade longer than they need to. That's $300,000 of taxpayer money that could be back with the taxpayers if somebody is ready to rejoin society.
Let me turn, only a couple of minutes remain, Grover, and I'm going to double back across the river, across the Potomac from where you sit there in Newsmax, Washington, to the Commonwealth of Virginia, and what Terry McAuliffe decided to do with that executive action. Now, what is really going on there? Is that just pure politics looking ahead to November?
Yes, it's complete politics. What they had set up was something where they agreed, the legislature and the governor, that they'd look at cases of people who'd been out. In Virginia, they have a policy that you never get your voting rights back. And they said, well, let's look at it case by case. And I think they've gone through 18,000 cases and made adjustments for different people. But he just said, I'm not looking at anything. We're just going to let everybody be voting again. It's a perfectly reasonable thing to me to say that you've lost your right to vote because your judgment in hitting somebody on the head with a hammer is so impaired. I don't want you making decisions about who the mayor is, period. And I don't think that's unfair or unreasonable. It may be exactly the kind of punishment or part of your punishment that you deserve. It doesn't cost taxpayers anything, doesn't cost folks anything. It doesn't get in the way of somebody holding a job if you tell them that part of your punishment is you don't vote. Unfortunately, Terry McAuliffe said, I make no distinctions between murderers and teenage shoplifters. Everybody gets their vote back. What he was clearly doing was assuming that criminals are Democrats, which is an interesting thing for a Democratic governor to presume.
And we will have to leave it right there. Grover Norquist tonight from Newsmax, Washington. Grover, we really appreciate your time. Well, you heard what Grover had to say, making the conservative case for judicial reform and criminal justice reform, and you saw what Terry McAuliffe did in Virginia. Love to get your comments. Send them to me at newsmaxtv.com/comments and also via Twitter. We'll be right back.